Well, going right back, I came out of Loughborough Uni actually, and was early 2000s. So it was a tricky time actually to try and get a job, to be honest. The creative industry was nowhere near as big as it is now, and there just weren't the jobs going. So um, I aimed at all the big agencies. I sent letters off in those days as well, not emails, and got a lot of letters back saying no. So I did have those up until recently, about sort of 40, 50 sort of refusals for a job. And really, I just had to just get stuck in where I could get a job. And, I know there was 500 people going for a job I went for, and I managed to get it. An agency nobody would have heard of. I think they were called Southpaw at the time. And they've actually gone on to become another agency called Hue and Cry. And they do a lot of work in sort of experiential. But I came off a graphic communication course and doing graphic design, and then suddenly found myself sort of making stuff in 3D. So it was very, very different to where I thought I was going to go and what I was going to end up doing.
So that's what were the sort of timelines on that then, roughly?
Well, so that was, to be honest, that was back in like 2002, I think. So that's where I started out, and I spent my time sort of working my way up there. Really, I was the first employee, so there was only that partners. I went straight in with a couple of guys who'd really founded an agency off the back of one project, and then they suddenly needed people, so they had freelancers. They needed to take on a junior. That was me. And then, the great thing about it was I worked with a great senior and was exposed to some big brands like sort of Grey Goose vodka, Bombay Sapphire, all the Bacardi group, and pretty heavily worked in alcohol and spirits for like sort of 3 or 4 years. But it was everything to do with branding. And I suppose I was doing branding before I sort of really understood it, actually. Yeah. So I was sort of working with brands and helping build brand sort of experiences. And yeah, so that was my sort of introduction to the industry, really. And it wasn't the route I expected to take, but it was just the one that was there.
That must have been quite a baptism of fire then, to sort of just be thrown in at the deep end with that group's huge, isn't it? The Bacardi group. I can't remember their name.
Bacardi's the main group, and they're huge. But to be honest, for the studio I worked for, they were doing really basic stuff to start with. I realized I needed to just get a job and get into the industry, and that's the best way to start. I wanted to go to some bigger places, but I needed to start somewhere. And the great thing about it was they were on a bit of a sort of upward journey themselves. So we did very bog standard stuff in the first couple of months, but then suddenly, within a year, 2 years, we found that we were sort of putting on whole exhibitions for them, and these sort of touring sort of art exhibitions as well, sort of to promote the brands and launch the brands in this country. So it meant you were sort of learning as you went. So I had no industry sort of knowledge of that sort of sector, really. So I was just having to be a sponge and just take everything on.
So I presume everybody in the team was pretty much the same then, was they? Irrelevant of status, whether they were midweights or seniors, if everyone's just been brought together to work in that immediate project, was it all a case of, oh God, we've got to try and figure this out immediately, not really quick?
Yeah, well, I suppose, the people who ran it, the two founders, that they were super experienced and had that experience already of those industries, but I didn't. And as I say, I think I came off a graphic design course, so very much, and then quite pre-digital, to be honest, as well. So that was just a bit of a tool then, and so it was very sort of print focused in those days. And so I was in that world, and then suddenly found myself in a sort of physical, what do environments look like? We need to put on a whole sort of event in London to promote sort of one of these brands, like a whole cocktail sort of extravaganza, actually. And it's like, what's that like? How does that look for Bacardi? How does that look for Grey Goose?
Mm.
And so I think I stumbled into branding in a way, in what I'd say is proper branding, in the way that you're getting into the way that the brands sort of create proper experiences and think about the, you know, the touchy-feely parts of a brand rather than just the outside logo packaging side of the brand.
Yeah, that must have been a really, really exciting experience though, to go from nothing to experiencing print, exhibition, real life, you know, all of these, you know, huge, all these different requirements.
Yeah. To be honest, the best thing about it, I just really enjoyed it.
Yeah.
I think I enjoyed it because I had no idea probably what I was doing. And to be frank, it was just, I didn't know how to create a piece of packaging. I didn't know how to put on an exhibition or event. And I was learning all these things. But so the root of it all came back to, you know, I suppose understanding about branding, which was great. And I was sort of slightly subliminally doing it, I think. It was you know, being in an agency or a studio like that was changing quite quickly. It was exciting because the next project wasn't just another sort of design project, another branding project. It was completely different. So we'd be, you know, going off somewhere else in Europe to put on a little event or a show or that type of thing. And you just had to go along with it, really.
Yeah, brilliant. So what from moving on from there, what was the next steps in the career from, you know, jobs that you took from there on?
Yeah, so I was there for a while, and that business have changed a bit actually. And then I think, as lots of people do, they just get a bit, things become a bit samey, not in the agency, but in terms of I started to feel a bit stuck, to be honest. I think that's the best way to describe it. And I was thinking, I've had this really exciting experience, but I didn't know anything else. I didn't know anything else in the industry at all. You know, I'd gone from uni to London, one agency, and then I sort of felt, how do I even get into the other agencies that are out there? And I'll be honest, it's sort of 5-6 years in, I started to feel a bit sort of, you know, bothered that I wasn't going to break out of where I was and into somewhere new.
Yeah.
So freelance, you know, was the route, really. And that again took me to a mix of businesses, agencies, some great, you know, some weren't. But I had to, you know, just do work and then see what would, you know, what would happen. But I had my eye set on one place. It was a branding sort of studio called Fig Tree. So they don't exist either anymore. They've turned into Profit, and they've been bought by a bigger strategy agency, Profit, who are huge and brilliant. But I thought these guys, Fig Tree, they're great. They're not one of those big branding agencies that I've sort of grown up with. They were doing something a bit different. And I really liked their mix of strategy and sort of very, very loose, like creative thinking. So I thought, right, that's where I want to go. And then I got a freelance gig there. And then really it was about putting in a lot of sort of effort with them for a few months. And I got to that point where they took me on, actually. So it all changed from there.
Oh, so you isolated specific people, they were the main ones that you wanted to work with, you picked those out yourself?
Yeah, so, and to be honest, like then, it wasn't like I was bombarded with loads of different companies and like studios. You know, it still was at that point digital, but pre-social. So you just weren't aware as much about who else was out there, only more the big names that you'd probably read in D&AD. And but I liked the sound of these guys because they were, I suppose, trying to do things, branding a little bit different. It was less polished, less corporate, I suppose. And I thought that attitude was really cool. They were just launching sort of HTC phones at the time. They'd been working with Orange, and they'd been doing some really interesting, quite illustrative stuff with them.
Yeah.
So I thought that's where I want to go. And it was because it's sort of what I wanted to learn next. Is I wanted to, you know, I felt I'd learned enough from where I was. And then I was thinking about who's doing interesting stuff and what can I get out of it, really.
Yeah, so what was that, roughly that time frame?
That was about sort of
late 2000?
2000, late 2000s, 2008, I think.
Because that was sort of then, was that really the emerging part of where branding, like you say, stepped away from the really polished, that we're starting to experiment in collaboration more with illustration, photography, more ad driven. There was a lot of multidisciplinary work.
Yeah, definitely. It was obviously pre-design studios and Kotos, and some of the other bigger names have been around, for a little bit longer, but it was, I suppose, before that movement of sort of branding. And I think it was, what I liked about it and was interested in it was very driven by a better collaboration of strategy and design. So it was very much about the two sort of integrating much more and moving away from this corporate side of branding, which I think the agencies around there, pretty much had that reputation for being, if you needed a big brand doing, you'd go to a big agency. So these guys were sort of cutting through and thinking, well, no, you don't. You need a great strategic thought, and some clever, sort of creative to follow it.
Yeah. What was the sort of size of Fig Tree, Matt? Was that a big team?
Well, they grew really quickly. When I was interested in them, I knew there was only six or eight of them, and they kicked off in a garage. And I know that one of the first designers, actually, I went to uni with as well. Great guy. And it sounds a bit cheesy, but everybody talks about family, but there was definitely that sort of mentality with them, actually, that sort of, if you got on well with them, they would make a great role for you as well. Yeah. So I really liked that, and they just kept taking people on, and I think we got to about 40 odd people by the time I left.
Wow, so it was rapid growth. And so what was just take us through the next steps up to Anagram, that fill in that time frame.
Yeah. So to be honest, I only spent like two years with them. I think it was I just did quite a lot in 2 years with them, and then felt there was a new opportunity, actually. So a great friend and sort of creative director, actually, he moved from Fig Tree and went to a company called Heavenly, and branding agents Heavenly, and they were quite independent in their approach. So that's why they differed from some of the big, the big names. So they weren't a big sort of corporate sort of agency. And he was like, look, we're doing this agency's been going for a few years. It's going for a big change. Love for you to be on board. And I was thinking, well, Fig Tree's going well. I'm liking what I'm doing. It's sort of going up. Now I'm going to go and look over there where it looked like it was going a bit backwards before, to be honest. But he was like, no, I'm going to go in as the sort of ECD. I'd love you to be involved with the team. We'll build something. So it was a bit of a punt, to be fair, and but took it. And yeah, it was just the next sort of great step, really. Heavenly had quite a different approach. So Fig Tree was very, very strategic and a lot of rigor in their strategy. And then Heavenly brought a slightly campaign point of view to branding, which I really loved. I loved the fact that it was about ideas that you could get immediately. You didn't have to read loads of pages of sort of strategy about a brand. And I think that really resonated. And I think they were doing that, a few years before I think brands realized they needed to shift that way, actually. So I spent sort of 3 years with them building up that team. And then again, another sort of opportunity came up, and there was a position over at sort of Don't Panic, actually. So Don't Panic, a very, very different agency to anything I'd experienced before, far more in the sort of ad space, a bit unconventional in their route into creative as well. And they had been sort of creating sort of films, campaign films, way before people really talked about sort of viral sort of content. They didn't set up in that way. They just sort of began creating interesting sort of stories and films that people liked. And brands loved working with them. And there was an opportunity to help build the more design and brand side of that offer. And so, yeah, I took another another jump and a bit of a leap to join over there.
So those in that sort of time frame, from a technology perspective, that moved a hell of a lot, hasn't it, from Fig Tree to sort of Don't Panic. Did that feel like it was something really exciting at the time? Or was
yeah, I think the thing is, like, I suppose each one of those sort of saw different bits of that technology. You know, some of it makes me feel a bit old, but like a lot of that technology actually right at the beginning, you know, back when, and we sort of laugh about this sometimes now, when it was all about, you know, the printing methods and things like that right at the beginning, and that's all the stuff you'd see in the D&AD book. Then it was, you know, a bit going in more digital, and then the great thing about Don't Panic was, I think they were right at the beginning with making content, you know, sort of like storytelling in a really memorable way. They weren't trying to make, you know, sort of films go viral or anything like that. They were we're driven by just doing good stuff and good content. And then the you know, the output of that really is that people just share it on their own. And so I think at that stage, brands were getting on board with that and going, hold on, I can make my stuff far more effective if I do this type of work. And actually it's a bit off brand, but people like it more. And it doesn't cost me anywhere near as much money in media.
Yeah.
So that was really, I suppose, really inspiring. And when I was at Don't Panic, more on the branding design side, one thing I was trying to figure out was, you know, how does what we're doing relate to what the rest of the agency is doing? And how can we learn from what they're doing with branding and sort of with storytelling, and then bring that into the brand work that we were doing? So how can we make our brand sort of be a bit more engaging, I suppose, for clients?
Yeah, that's really interesting, sort of like to look back at something like that, because in today's world it's quite commonplace, isn't it, and probably oversaturated with the you know, that people doing the same sort of thing. But back then, to be someone to lead that and to be the first to take that sort of punt, so to speak, and it seems so obvious now, doesn't it? Like, in hindsight, it's all obviously always golden, but at the time it must have been a bit like, I suppose it's just the vision of the person that leads the agency, isn't it, or the team that you're part of. That's
and like none of these, nobody there sort of set out to do. I think the interesting thing was nobody actually really set out, I don't think, to go and try and do things differently. It was just their way. They didn't. None of them. So like Heavenly, I don't think was the same. I don't think really intent, but they didn't sort of say you need an alternative agency, so this is us. They just were doing stuff they enjoyed doing, and it turned into an agency. So the part that I worked with, it was Mark, who's now my business partner. He set up that part of Don't Panic because he was stood in the street. I think he was putting up some guerrilla sort of advertising or something, and a client was like, what are you doing? Like, you know, why are you putting this on my building? They got chatting, and then this client realized Mark could actually do some more effective branding for him, for his project, than just going to a conventional studio. So, you know, Mark being Mark was sort of thought, well, I might as well start my own version of a studio and agency off the back of his project. And he did that for a few months, and then I joined him there, and so that's how we met.
I suppose that's one of the greatest things about our industry, and I suppose it could apply to many others, but especially creative industries, is that you can sort of explore and you can implement your own thoughts and ideas in you know, if you see something that could be done differently or done your way, you know, you can just do that, can't you? You don't have to sort of abide by too many rules, really.
Yeah, I think the only decision, well, probably only made a couple of decisions when I chose to actually join places, but apart from the one with Fig Tree, when I said I'd like to go and work for them, to be honest, when I went there, I hated it. Didn't like it at all. It spent sort of 3 or 4 months wondering why I thought that. But then it just took a while to get into it, and then I loved it, and I loved the place. You know, I loved the people actually, and I think I definitely think a lot of the decisions have been more just to sort of go on and explore and see what happens, rather than being because I definitely want to do something or be somewhere.
Yeah. Yeah, no, yeah, I couldn't agree more. So moving on to, was that from Don't Panic, was that then the stepping stone to Anagram?
No, so I then, to be honest, I again spent like a couple of years, always the same 2.5 years, I think, at sort of Don't Panic. And yeah, we just got to a point that I was ready to, I'd been helping sort of build up that studio. I was creative director. We'd opened a little sort of satellite sort of offering in New York. It was fun, doing some great stuff. But I suppose I'd never sort of gone and tried out a bigger agency. I'd never sort of gone anywhere, and an offer came to go to work for Future Brand. So I was like, yeah, do I? So I thought I'd give it a go. And again, it was one of those offerings that we were going to do something interesting, build a bit of the studio up. And I hadn't got experience of that size, that type of agency, huge global, a big presence. And yeah, I spent a year and a half there, and it was great. I worked on the Currys rebrand that's just launched, and that was amazing, to be honest. It's such a big beast of a project to be involved in, and you don't get many of those, and they are so much more complicated than anybody could even imagine unless you're really in the middle of it. And so they're so involved, and so many stakeholders in a business. So it was one of the great things I got out of that time. But I think I realized that, to be honest, that type of agency and that size just wasn't me. I just, being frank, I just wasn't in control of what I was doing, not in a control freak way, but in a more, you feel like you can make decisions and on jobs, I suppose, and they're yours, and in terms of what you're doing each day. And I suppose that's what I was missing a little bit. I was missing my experience back at Don't Panic and Heavenly, where I was sort of leading a sort of a creative team much more. And so, yeah, me and Mark sort of had a couple of drinks and had a bit of a chat. And I suppose we just felt, look, if we don't do this, we won't sort of know. And I think we both like mutually got to a point where we were probably questioning a little bit, like, what's our worth? So Mark had like done his bit with sort of Don't Panic, but the sort of the offer that we had sort of helped built up had sort of merged into the main sort of agency. I was at Future Brand doing big, amazing client work, but quite sort of working me and maybe just a few other sort of people. And I was thinking I could sort of be doing this myself, really, in the way I'm working, and with a bit more sort of say over things. And then Mark was sort of thinking the same type of thing, really, that can we do what we love doing and take all that experience that we've got and turn it into a new studio.
Right. Just quickly before we go touch on where you're at now, Matt, just going back to Future Brand, what sort of scale are you talking about there for an agency of that size?
In terms of its people?
Yeah.
Well, so interesting, like Future Brand, like I'd only seen these sort of agents from the outside, and they're big. Their reach is big. But to be honest, these things have changed from my understanding. It's what these agencies that used to be big in terms of people are no longer as big. They've changed quite a lot. The models have changed. So actually, I went from Don't Panic, and I think our largest, we probably had a team of sort of 20, 30 odd, that type of thing. And seeing as I was sort of leading that as a sort of creative director and then supporting Mark at the time, I had quite a lot of people working with me. And then when I went to Future Brand, actually, the team I was working with was about 10. Okay. It was actually smaller in a way, and it got smaller and smaller and smaller. So it was a very different experience actually to be working on the big projects, but actually with a smaller team.
But there was a number of teams working on individual areas under the Future Brand name, is that? Or was it just, did they then outsource?
Well, so like I was Future Brand London, and Future Brand London actually is sort of, at that time was split into two creative teams. One which was more on the branding side, and then one which was more on the packaging side actually. And I worked on the more branding side. And actually that team was getting smaller and smaller and smaller. There was amazing, talented people there. You know, but they've moved on, to be honest. They start to move on and they start to go to design studio and some others as well. So yeah, so it's eventually got a little bit tighter, but I suppose that's just how you compete.
Yeah, and the reason I ask that quite a lot, and ask, you know, to other guests, is that I think for people outside of the London bubble, you know, and in my experience, sometimes an average team can be, you know, 5, 6 people. You know, it's just nice to sort of get the, you know, the complete opposite sort of scale, to sort of try and understand that process and how isolating that can maybe feel, or a lot of people maybe want to leave because they don't have that control, like you say, because they feel just part of a cog in a bigger machine.
So I suppose different agencies are set up in really different ways. And that's one thing I've experienced, and that's been really brilliant. Like some have been hugely creative led. To be honest, like Don't Panic was in terms of our side. And then I've had others where it's been a bit more 50-50, and then Fig Tree is very strategy led. So there was a strategy team would lead a lot of stuff. And actually at Future Brand, like the team who would lead the client services side, they were amazing, and they'd lead a lot of the projects as well. So, you know, that makeup of people is very different from place to place.
Yeah.
But I think what I'd noticed, that the creative teams are just becoming tighter, to be honest.
Yeah, yeah, that makes sense. And it's to sort of concentrate the talent, you know, to maximise, you know, instead of having 1,000 people doing what 10 could do, it's you know, it makes sense, doesn't it, really?
Yeah, yeah.
But moving on to Anagram then, Matt, when starting that out, did you guys, you and Matt, have a real clear vision of what you wanted to achieve? Did you just go in it feeding off what you'd both done individually in the past, or did you have a vision that was fitting yourself into a space that maybe was a bit of a void?
Yeah, I'd like to say we did have a really clear vision, but we probably had an ambition, I'd say, rather than a vision. And I suppose the ambition was to do all the stuff that we love doing and the way that we love doing it with brands and businesses, and, you know, working pretty closely with the clients and people, keeping it small, so that we could still be involved. I think we missed that enjoyment of working quite closely with clients when we got maybe a bit bigger and we were sort of out of the mix a bit. And then, yeah, just, I don't think it was more like a space we were trying to occupy or anything like that. I think that's partly because there's so many different companies out there and, you know, other studios out there. But I think what we liked doing was we liked making stuff, to be honest. Like, you know, I like making stuff, like anything out of like the normal sort of design and sort of brand set worlds, I suppose, like Mark does as well. You know, being sort of somebody who sort of sets up now sort of a couple of places, and I think we get that we enjoy that side of things. So we felt, you know, when we can work with clients, if we can get stuck in from the beginning, help them form the brand idea, all the parts that go with it, and then sort of stick with them and help sort of make that brand and make it sort of roll it out and happen, rather than just doing one part of that journey.
Yeah.
That's where we sort of felt we fitted really, and that lends itself really well, you know, to I suppose businesses that want to sort of just get on with stuff and do it now, and sort of not sort of drag it out really. So that was our sort of where we sort of started to fit, I'd say.
Yeah, that sounds great. I know it's been relatively recent, isn't it? The new website and the sort of, is it a brand refresh, or was that your original identity? Is that was more of a recent change, isn't it?
Yeah. So well, I overlapped for like 3 months at Future Brands and Anagram. So what was it? It's back in, I think, 2019, September 2019. And so it was like, right, decided to make the jump. It's like start the process, you know, given notice, 3-month notice period. And that's it. And then you're in it. And so we had 3 months. It basically just set a timer. And, you know, we didn't have anything put to one side as such to sort of fall back on. We didn't have necessarily, I wasn't like nicking a big client or anything from Future Brand. Mark had a couple of clients sort of lined up that we could do work with. So the first 3 months I was going to Future Brand, or maybe even on the way into Future Brand, I think the first week I went and did a pitch or a meeting straight away, and then went back into Future Brand and did my week's work, and then did some stuff in the evening, pulling a few people we'd know, to help us out. You really lean on the people you know and the talent that you know. And we did that for those first 3 months. And yeah, got the company running really in those first sort of 3 months up until Christmas.
So for anybody that's sort of thinking about going out on their own, or is in the start of that journey themselves, what are those early days like, that baby steps? Is that a case of just finding your feet? Is that trying to manage your time, realizing that it's down to you to sort of open the studio? You've got to find the work, you've got to speak to clients, you've got to manage, etc., etc.
So I can only speak from my experience of doing it more recently, having experience, I suppose, in the creative industry, rather than somebody who's just gone out of university. So it was really about leverage. You had to just leverage everything you've got. Leverage the fact that you walk into a client meeting and you're explaining to what we're pitching to you is, the knowledge that we've got and the work that we've done. And yes, some of that work has been done at other agencies, but it's been done by us. And to start with, that was really, really important. And, everybody knows that sort of you're going to sort of work with different people, different freelancers. And to be honest, that was part of our model as well. We were saying that it is us. We've got a pretty freelance sort of team who then we pull in for different sort of projects. So that was really important, sort of just going out there quite confidently and sort of leveraging that. And then that sort of gave us those first few months so that we could then start working out what we wanted to do. And we did then start sort of getting clients that we'd worked with before who were really interested and wanted to come along with us, which was fun. And it's nice that they still wanted to sort of work with us. So yeah,
it's amazing, because I think it's one of those sort of parts of it that can sometimes easily get skipped over. The idea that I started somewhere and then we were working with Nike. And it's there's quite a lot of months and years in between that are just solid graft, knocking on doors.
Yeah, a lot of it, to be honest. And we weren't ready for the last. Well, we weren't obviously expecting the last sort of year or so, but we, did that 3 months of overlapping jobs. And then we did, I think 2 or 3 months we were working from home anyway. And we were a bit ready in that sense that we didn't have a studio. We were about to find a studio, work was picking up. And then obviously everything hit. And we had to slightly change our view and think, right, how do we, we're new, we don't want to fold that quickly. So how do we do this? And we just kept it tight and, kept working with the people we knew, decided not to try and overly grow, and sort of use the time, I suppose, to work out what we wanted to do and the brands we want to work for. And then, more recently, then that meant that we could launch a new site. We wanted it to be, I suppose, reflective of our approach, really, and be a bit sort of straight up and a bit bolder.
Yeah.
And which is something we try to bring when we work on brands.
I think that sort of summed it up perfectly. I was trying to think of a phrase or a word to sum up the identity and the website. I think ballsy and sort of brave is really perfect for it, because I really love it. And the way like the wording and stuff, you've got things on there. I've got it open here, like brands who sway hearts, win big, things like that sort of mean the same as things that I've read before, but it's been worded really, really sort of emotionally driven. It's quite sort of
it's always nice to hear, but to be honest, that line has got a lot of good attention. And I think the thing is that we didn't try to do something that was radically different to anybody else. I think we just wanted to do something that felt right for us. Yeah. And say that the type of conversations we get into with clients are pretty down to earth. You know, we will ask pretty honest questions of them. You know, you've got to work within budgets, things like that. But then we also want to try and do as characterful work as we can do, which is something that we always set out to try and achieve. You know, if the scope's there to do it. So we wanted it to capture that side of what we can offer as well.
Yeah, and I talk quite a lot on these sessions about the craft of design, you know, going back to the traditions and respecting that as well as pushing it forward. And I think I see that in a lot of your work. You've got that, some more modern sort of takes on photography and some of it, or motion, and then but there's still like the typography is, you know, set in a way that's, you know, always be legible and read right, and you know.
I think, like, the thing is, like, I've always said I've never been like a you know, just a type geek or that type of approach, or just a very specialist in a certain sort of way. You know, I'm quite mindful that there's so many good people out there that you get to work with, and so that's been a key part of it, really, of making sure you pull all those people in who are, you know, those talented people. Like, we're working with people at the moment, and they bring so much craft to the project, and you know, a lot of it really is down to those people who are involved in the project. You know, there's a lot of bits that go into a brand, in our view. Like, it's a kit, you know, it's the idea behind the brand and the name, and we're involved in all those stages, but you need all these really sort of clever people to get stuck in as well, and bring their thought to it, which is what we try to, you know, we try to do now. And I think that's something we really want to do with Anagram, is make sure that every bit of the brand works hard. So I will bring in somebody who's knows far more about typography than I do, and loves it, you know, and they do that bit in the same way that we'll bring in a different type of thinker or photographer, rather than just a name because we know they're big at the moment. We'll look for somebody who we think is going to fit.
So is collaboration something that's really, you know, the heart of what Anagram stands for, and when you're working with clients is picking the best people for specific briefs? You know, is that key to moving forward?
I don't think we put it out there as being, you know, we're built on that sort of model of collaboration. I think it's more it'll be more realistic, that it's like, we don't have 50 people in our studio, so you have a pretty tight team, and that tight team is great at what they do, but you, depending on, you know, what you need to do, every client's different, right? And what we think the brand needs to do and where we take it is then when we'll pull in, you know, great people.
Yeah, and you touched upon a few seconds ago about not wanting to grow too fast, especially during last year with the sort of the destructive mental nature and financial nature of last year. Is that something that you, again, it's something that I've heard a lot about, I've never really experienced it myself firsthand. Do you think that desire to consistently want to grow fast is quite a detrimental thing in the industry as a whole, or just something that you concentrated on as you guys only?
I think from our point of view, it's more, we, you know, like to be involved, and so if we keep things tighter, you know, we will be more involved, and I think we get better work and more focused work out of it, and so therefore the client, you know, benefits. Yeah. So I think, rather than just deliver, like just churn it out, we just don't want to get to that point, and then it's just about that. I think we want to make sure that, you know, we enjoy every project that we work on, and the best way to do that is to keep it pretty tight. Yeah, no, definitely. What do you got from the biggest challenges that you've faced? Is there anything that stands out as something that you're really proud to have overcome? You know, then it sort of set you in good stead for where you're at now. At any point? Oh, yeah, is it every day? Is there something crops up? But is there anything? I mean, more anything substantial, maybe through your working in other agencies, right through to maybe one that's working as solo? I think just confidence, really. I think that's definitely it. It's like, you're a very different end of like the industry to sort of where I set out, and it's like, now I'm sort of a lead of obviously the lead of you know, Anagram with Mark, which means I'm in front of a client all the time. I have to be reassuring and getting clients excited by the work that we do. And you've got to get them on board with stuff. And the other end of that, when you're sort of setting out, you don't have that experience. And so what I remember is like points where I had to get really much more confident of going into like client meetings and speaking to client and just having a voice, to be honest, having an opinion, and making sure it was an opinion, yeah, rather than just saying something. And that was a big it's a big learning. It depends, like everybody's different, you know, everybody's different personalities. But I think when I set out, I wasn't the personality who wanted to stand out, to be honest, in the room and in the meeting. I was really passionate about things I could talk a lot about, like my ideas, but that's because they were very sort of truth-based. So if we had created them, we really believed in it, was easier to talk about them. And that was probably my learning, that it was then make sure what you're doing, you know, you really understand and you've really got into the details of and you believe in, and then it becomes so much easier to go and talk about it.
Yeah, it's funny because when I've only asked that question a couple of times, and when I asked it the first time, I thought someone was going to answer it as in, what I struggled to choose a colour palette for a project or a typeface. And I started to realise the more people I speak to in creative, how much confidence and like imposter syndrome, how much that is really, that's uncovered that question. It's much more about the people. I think as a creative people as a whole, we struggle with that.
Yeah, but it's the other way I learned much more about it was actually just through other people, to be honest. And I picked that up at different agencies. So, and I remember one guy, and this was at Don't Panic, and he was amazing. He was a writer and a bit of an actor as well. And because they did much more film work, we lent on that for writing sort of narratives of brands because they would just be far more engaging. And I sat in a room and he was pitching to National Autistic Society, actually. And the whole room was just in awe, pretty much, of him talking. And it was like a stage performance. And I just sort of realized that's the way you're supposed to deliver narratives. You know, you're not just delivering words, but you're supposed to be far more sort of emotive. Yeah. And it made such a difference. And I think I took that away with me then, sort of every time we then went to, you know, pitches, that it's that way you deliver the story. It was so important, as well as what we put up there on the screen.
Yeah, and I think that's even more pertinent now because of the saturation of social media and things, and you can see great work endlessly and you can feel a bit sort of left behind at times, or you can feel, you know, knocks your confidence. But if you can have that, you can, when you do produce content, it resonates with somebody about something, you know, it's aimed at people for a specific reason. It's got that motive. It's not just for everybody to just be passive about it. It's for people to go, I love, 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 love. And even if it's only a small percentage, it's that connection.
I think it's like one thing I've always thought is, you know, I really enjoy what we do. And I love doing it. And I think that enjoyment's really important. But the other side is, but it's sort of not for me. It's for other people. And then I try and to remember that side as well. So I enjoy the making, the doing of it, but then I always try and remember, judge it by, you know, don't judge it on my own sort of thoughts, and sort of judge it far more on who I'm aiming at.
Yeah, definitely. I just noticed that we're running towards the end. As usual, I say this every time, it's like a blink of an eye, but just to leave you on a bit of a simpler question, but what do you sort of see for the future of Anagram, in the short and long-term future? Is it a day-to-day existence, or is it, you know, shooting for the stars?
I just think probably it's the way that we work with, more the way we work with clients, I think, actually. So we don't just want to be these people who come in and give you something and then we walk away again. I think there's more opportunity to, especially now, you know, sort of plugging in far more to other businesses. Big, you know, amazing sort of brands can afford in-house agencies. There's so many more little startups coming out who need that but can't afford it. So I think actually it's a more collaborative approach between sort of us and those agencies, you know. So I think that's where we'd like to take it, because it makes us feel like we're just, you know, making brands, you know, sort of each week that way, and we're a bit more invested in it.
Yeah, perfect. That's a great place to leave it, Matt. I really appreciate your time. It's great to catch up again and find out more about the studio and your career to date. So it's yeah, no, really, really interesting. Next week we've got Ragged Edge next Friday, which will be interesting. We've got Gurley and Raj on Wednesday, so our last Wednesday one of this month. So well, I think we'll leave it there. I hope everyone has a great weekend. It's been a pleasure to see everybody again. I hope that was gave a bit of inspiration and insight, and I'll see you all again soon.
Cheers, Chris.
Take care. Thank you.
Bye, buddy.